Welcome back to the Emerald Knight, Part 16, Bitter Cup. The first thing you'll notice is that I now have a border. I took some spare time for the past week and a prior week to try and design something for a border, something a little more interesting than just white and the writing software. It took so long because I was at first I was actually designing their faces. And I spent a long time doing that, and while I didn't end up using it, I did enjoy it, but I decided to just make them silhouettes. Because in my experience, and I know other people's experience too, when readers visualize a character while they're reading and then see a visualization of that character brought out in art or a movie, it may not exactly line up with what they have had in their head and might be kind of disappointing. So for the sake of that, I just kept them as silhouettes, which I think was probably a better move. And this way it's not so distracting from the writing. But speaking of writing, during this part, I don't know. I just, I didn't write it all at once. I didn't write the entire part all at once, in one sitting, but when I did sit down to write it, I don't know, I just felt a little different than I had previously. In that I just sat down and just wrote. Like, I didn't I didn't sit around and think what the heck I was gonna write. I just took what I had, like all that has been written so far up until this point, and I just wrote. I just went from there. Like, I just took what I had and just capitalized on it. And that sort of thing got me thinking. When after I was done writing, it got me thinking about adding and subtracting to narratives, especially longer narratives like this story and books and whatnot. And it's kind of an odd sensation because, alright, so like if you've written a fan fiction, you a lot of the material is laid out already for you, and you know what you're working with. By the way, I think fan fiction is a great way to learn how to do any sort of art, drawing, writing. I don't know, I just want to throw that in there. But like, when you're writing a fan fiction, all the majority of the material is already laid out for you. You already know the majority of the situation, of relationships and characterization. But when you go from fan fiction to completely original content, and if it's a longer narrative like a book, it probably applies to shorter narratives, but you feel a little overwhelmed because it's like, what do I put in this? What does this story consist of? And in my own experience, I've been like, not just the Emerald Knight, but another project. I've felt that sensation, that sort of overwhelming feeling of, all right, what do I add to this thing? Like, even as I'm halfway through trying to fight, even though I'm halfway through writing the rough draft. And I mean, at that point, I guess it depends on what the story is, how it's stylized, whatever, but at that point, I feel that it's just counterproductive to worry about that sort of thing, to worry about what you're adding, what's going to be added to it. And that maybe the course of action to take from there is to just roll with what you got. Just take all the stuff that you have laid down and work from there. And that's the sort of sensation I felt when writing part 16. One thing I want to say real quick about this, I have some information in between asterisks. So that is a new thing that I've decided on implementing in my formatting. So the asterisks, anything in between asterisks, are notes meant for the reader as well as for me. As a reminder when I revise. That note right there also reminds me of... So the note is saying that, it could use more language to exemplify Aranthus's disdain for the knight. And thinking about that sort of thing, I'm reminded of something I read recently. I've only read a section of it, not the entire thing, but I'm reminded of Stephen King's It. In It, there's a section where we get the perspective of adult Beverly and her abusive husband. And as I was reading that, I was, impressed by the way Stephen King manipulated the language, in that, it sort of felt like I was in somebody's brain. And that, while I may not want to write exactly like him, it's certainly something to take away. Like the way he uses the language to give that impression that, now our spirit, so to speak, is within the spirit of the character whom we are reading through, or following the story through their perspective. And that's the sort of thing I would like to emulate in this part, in its entirety, really. I would like to implement that sort of thing better. At the very least, give a sensation to the reader, a sense of empathy or sympathy for Aranthus. Some kind of pathy. Sociopathy, antipathy, even. Apathy. Yeah. I would like to try and, in the future, when I revise this part, give a better sensation of being in Aranthus's perspective, point of view. This part really, after the first ellipses, like this section, on until the end of the video, while I was writing this too, I was taken back to something I had previously written in that fan fiction that I've mentioned before. So, in the fan fiction, there's the main character who's walking through a canyon, and they're thinking about their family and conflict and stuff. And in this part, we have Aranthus walking through a forest, following the night, just thinking about finally having the headspace to really think about all the stuff that's going on, that's happened and that's going on, and things that may happen. And when I first sat down to write it, I didn't know it was going to lead into all this. But as I started writing, it just felt natural to fall into all this stuff. And what brought me back to that fan fiction was the walking, the traveling. Okay, we have a traveling section. What's going on with Aranthus? And so came out all this stuff that she's thinking about and wondering about, And it really made me get this feeling of, oh, I've learned something. I've learned how to write something. Like, I've given a situation in a narrative, I know how to handle this sort of thing now because of my previous experience. And I'll be honest and say that feels really good. That I know how to handle myself when I approach something similar, such as this part right here. And this part also serves as an example of communicating the passage of time without explicitly saying so. I do also want to say that I do have a general idea of where I want the succeeding events after this part of the story to go. Just a general sense, not, I still don't know how this story is going to end. I don't really know much about what's going to happen until, I don't know much about what's going to happen after this part of the story. That being said, the parts that I do have a general sense of, I wanted the characters to end up in a certain location, but as I was writing this part, talking so much about Almrin, it made me think, well, and writing about the aunt's cottage, Aranthus's aunt's cottage, I thought, well, wouldn't it be justifiable in a narrative to go there and see the home and stuff like that? And I know that may be kind of spoilery, but I kind of felt it important to talk about that, because in at least some sense, I want to give a representation of what's going on in my head as I'm writing this thing. This crazy mess that I've gotten myself into. Speaking of this mess, I recently I've well, I mean, there's a lot of obligations going on with me right now. I have a lot of obligations right now. And anyway, long story short, I will try to get a pair of videos out per week, like one with commentary, one without commentary per week. I will try to do that. I'm reluctant to promise it because, I don't know if I can keep that promise, but I will try to get at least one pair of videos out per week. And at that rate, this story will go on for 1,000,000 years, and before you know it, the rapture will befall us before the ending of this story. But I would like to keep this going. I'm enjoying it. I like this mess. But going back to talking about just rolling with what I have, as I was writing this part, it probably helped that I was really tired when I was writing. When I sat down to write this part as well, that I just worked with what I had. I just sat down and too tired to think about what to add, what to subtract. Just went with what I had, went from there. And I like that because it felt, at least as I was writing, it felt that progress was being made continuously. And I would like to try to get that going more often. A quick word about elf language. As you'll see in a second, I add an apostrophe to the city, the capital city, Zeedia. I'm just kind of rolling with it for now. Since Aranthus's curse word involved a couple of apostrophes, I thought maybe it'll look cooler if I put one there. So I did, and I mean, I don't know how the elf language is going to work as compared to the knight's language, but I'll figure it out at some point and try to justify those apostrophes. This paragraph here was born from the knowledge that I gained from Modern History, the YouTube channel that I'd mentioned before. Gaining more knowledge about medieval times and gaining a sense, vicariously, a sense of environment for this story. A sense of setting, a sense of atmosphere. But in one of Modern History's videos, Jason talks about armies traveling and how much devastation they cause even to their own, even on their own land, because they have to consume so many resources in order to sustain itself. And that sort of thing got me thinking about the moment before this story started. In acting, they often use the phrase "the moment before," in which the actors will, and director, they'll think about what happened the moment before a scene. But it got me thinking about the moment before, how the people of Corwin even knew that the army was coming their way and what they were doing about it. In a second, you'll see me write something about a bitter tin cup, and I just want to say that I'm kind of proud of that imagery that harkens back to, I think, part 5, when Aranthus's family, everyone's dying around her, and her heart, I talk about her heart being like a crushing tin cup, but I like pulling that imagery back for this situation where she's trying to decide what to do with her life from here on out. But with that being said, that'll do it for part 16. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.